So let's get started. You guys have met me. I've met everybody here, I think. I'm Sav Ketan. Honestly, better description of me is probably here. I don't think of myself really as a professional. I'm very much more of those hashtags and how I call myself. And yeah, my daughter likes to headbang with me, so that's perfect. Uh, what? Okay, so I got a lot of questions yesterday about like, hey, I'm starting my digital transformation journey. Which CDP should I buy? Which tool should I buy? How should I think about it? And that's really the core of what I want to talk about today. I want to help you guys understand how to think about data and tools and stack, just because those things are evolving fast and people are getting lost in the sea of craziness, right? So let's just set the stage. Last few years, I don't know how many people remember this quote. COVID started in March. In May, Satya Nadella was out there saying 10 years of digital transformation in 2 months, and it definitely felt like it. And in fact, I think it accelerated as COVID went along, and it was really helpful, but it was crazy. We all had to adapt really fast. And then right after that, this happens, and like GDPR had come out in 2018, CCPA had come out in 2019, people were starting to get serious about it, but COVID really accelerated all the different regions coming out with their laws, and then by this year, we're actually, I think, close to 80% coverage in the world with data privacy laws. So the speed of change, again, increased really quickly once this got picked up, right? And then you come back, you talk about privacy sandbox. This is going on in parallel. Just watch that guy's expression. This is Mr. Turkish ice cream guy. Imagine he's Google. Imagine that ice cream cone is privacy sandbox. There you go, that guy's face represents marketers perfectly, right? So yeah, maybe we'll get it, maybe we won't, I don't know, but we keep trying to address that problem. It doesn't really go away, right? And then in parallel, this is going on. So this is the 2024 MarTech Super Graphic. 14,000 logos on here. This started in 2011 with 150 logos. 9,300% increase in 13 years. It's madness. Now, we get paid to keep up with this industry, and we cannot keep up with this industry. So I don't even imagine what it means to all of you in the marketing world who have to keep up with this. It's madness, right? It just nonstop. In fact, it kind of feels like this, right? It's just piling it on. But honestly, I don't think it's going to end. That is really reality check number one, okay? This is something we got to embrace. I legitimately think we are going to keep seeing this kind of pattern. Yeah, that's my favorite audience member. We're going to keep seeing this kind of pattern. And what's going to happen is the rate of change is probably going to get faster, especially accelerated by AI. We're going to be doing more and more things faster. And it can be overwhelming. There's no question about this. Like, you don't know what's coming, but then you got to respond when it's here. You don't know what you have to plan for, but then your leadership is telling you, figure this out in 3 months. And that's just where we live, right? So what has everybody been hearing, right? What I've been hearing, what I've seen is this is the answer to that problem. In fact, in COVID, there were studies by McKinsey and Deloitte and Bain and everybody that companies that adapted the most, they were the most agile, they were the most flexible, they were the ones that came out successful at the end of COVID. They are the ones who handled the AI transition, the data privacy transition. So that's really what I want to talk about today. In my mind, when you think about your stack and your data and your technology, this is really what gives you the superpower. If you think about your stack design with this in mind, you get a lot of power in when you have to adapt and respond. And that's kind of what I want to help you unlock, okay? So I want to propose this structure. Think of your data layer with these 3 pillars, and I'll explain why these are the pillars in a second. But once you start thinking about the purpose of the data, it helps you decide what tools you will need. Once you start thinking about different ways of access to the data, it helps you respond very quickly. And then consent, because I'll talk about that too. Now, this is not it, right? This is our product team. Jennifer, you met Jennifer earlier. She calls these the ilities. There is no data layer that's complete without all these reliable ilities, right? You're thinking about the business user and the IT user. You're thinking about making sure you know what data is going through and where. You make sure it's auditable for compliance. So we'll talk about these, but this together, if you have this, now your data layer can be plugged into pretty much anything, and that's what we want to unlock. So let's just understand how we got here. 20 years ago, when I started in this industry, this was the world that I was dealing with. Everybody had their own data. There was all these batch processes running. The batch process was as reliable as the communication between my parents. Sometimes they told each other stuff. Sometimes they told each other the wrong stuff. It was never told in timely fashion. The number of Monday mornings I spent dealing with a batch process that failed on the weekend was crazy. But that was the world. And in fact, marketing spent all its attention on the DMP. The DMP solved all marketing problems. And that's where everybody focused. Then the world starts to evolve a little bit. Marketing gets bigger. IT starts getting bigger. Cloud warehouses show up. Everybody's collecting more data. But there's no central data gravity center because I don't think it can exist easily, right? We're not there yet. Then the cookies problems start, and CDPs show up. World moves to first-party data. Now, CDP wants to be the center of the marketing universe, but it doesn't have all the data. It will never have all the data, and it should never have all the data. IT is always going to be a major source, and they should be that way, right? So IT and marketing start developing a relationship. Whether it's contentious or not, whether it's productive or not, they need each other. And they start realizing that. And then because of the cookies, the walled garden starts showing up. And now you got to worry about that too, right? And then these guys start realizing they got to get better friends, and AI shows up. And the minute AI shows up, now everybody's talking together, everybody's partnering because they all want to go in that direction. So that leads to a like happy marriage relationship situation. Marketing and IT have gotten really friendly. And just to clean up the diagram a little bit, this is the simplified universe right now, okay? And if I redraw this, kind of looks like this. All my channels, all my tools at the edge, and this center of data gravity in the middle. Now, I wrote CDP because Vertilium. That could be activation layer. That could be orchestration layer. You could think about it in many ways, and we'll talk about that. But the middle part is where I am recommending you think data first. And the edges are use case or tools first. Because if you have the middle set up for your data strategy, then you can plug anything into that, and you can unlock any use case, and that's what I'm going to show you, okay? So, but before I go forward, reality check number 2. There is no right answer. I cannot sit here and give you a diagram that will solve your problem because it's not one solution to everybody's problem. You have to take into account stuff that's going on in your world. And I'll show you an example. This is from Scott Brinker, the same person who did the Martech Supergraphic. And on the left, you can see B2B has still not massively embraced CDP and data warehouse. It makes sense. They are still relying heavily on their ABM tools, on their CRM tools, and as they should be. Automation still rules in the B2B world. But in the B2C world, you can see that data warehouse and CDP are starting to overtake the other centers of gravity. Now, I don't say that every business should go towards a data warehouse and data center. It really matters what you need for your business. And there are a lot of factors. And these are the factors, right? What's your industry? That's factor number 1. What's your business model? Those two usually go together, but somebody in retail who's talking directly to customers, very different than somebody who's making tiles and selling B2B. Completely different world. Healthcare, completely different world, whether you're selling to patients or to doctors. So you got to think about that. You got to think about maturity. Alan and Sharon from GSK yesterday were talking about that so much. Makes a very big difference. Budget, that's a huge problem. Alan's talking about having 6 data science people in his team. I haven't met anybody else today who has 6 data science people in their marketing team, right? So that matters a lot. And the biggest factor is existing technology, existing data. That makes the number 1 difference to how you think about how you're going to move forward. And a huge reason why everybody finds this hard is because it is hard. But they want it to be easy. They think, oh, I got my Snowflake, I'm good. They think I got my CDP, I'm good. Not at all. That is just the path. You still have to walk that path. You still have to do all the work on that path. So embrace your situation, right? That'll help you solve it with strategy, with intent. Let me give you an example, because this is how I've been thinking about this. I was trying to find a parallel that I could give you guys that would make sense, right? If I want my latte, I drink flavored coffee. My wife hates me for that, but that's just how it is. So if I want my peppermint mocha, or God forbid, a pumpkin latte, which I don't do anymore, but still. So I can only really get that at a coffee shop. If I go to Costco and expect that, it's not going to happen. But if I want to buy coffee for the whole office, and I want to buy it in bulk, and I try to buy that at Starbucks, that's not going to be a great experience. The beauty of this is they are both really good at what they do, and they both are not good at what the other person does. And it makes sense. That's how it should be. And the flexibility is because we have access to both. That's what gives us consumers what we need. That's how we got to think about this. You can't have one solution that solves your problem. You got to have a vision of what you need to solve, and then find the tools that fit together to solve that problem, right? And that's why the composable movement is becoming such a big deal, because they're giving you this idea that you can pick the exact 5 tools you need. But you got to understand what you're going to do with them, and you got to have a vision. That's what matters, right? So let's take this analogy a little bit forward. Data warehouse is meant for handling large volumes of data in big sets, in big batches. And data orchestration is the Amazon or UPS facility that's taking every package. It knows exactly what to do with that package and sends it exactly where it's supposed to go. They both handle packages, but very, very differently. And you need both. Now, reverse ETL comes along, but they're attached to the data warehouse. Now, reverse ETL is awesome. And it is automation for your warehouse, but it's very much attached to how the warehouse operates. It's an automation feature inside the warehouse data, and it needs the warehouse to be organized a certain way to be productive. This thing cannot give you individual package routing because it was never built for that, and it's not meant to do that, right? So if you compare all three, I cannot go to a UPS facility and ask them to give me an entire shipment that was supposed to go somewhere. They're not going to be able to figure it out, or they will take quite a bit of time to figure it out. If I go to my warehouse and ask for an individual packet, maybe they can do it. They'll take a long time to do it. Same thing with reverse ETL. You need to tell reverse ETL what you need to do. It doesn't have a rule-based orchestration system because that's not what it is. So the mistake that I'm seeing customers making is they'll get 1 or 2 of these and expect it to do all 3 things. It's not going to happen. That's not what they're good at. It's like asking a sprinter to run a marathon. They can do it. That's not what they do. So you got to think about the purpose of your tools and your partners. That will really help you make the right mix for yourself, okay? So you need all 3. Then you get coverage. The data orchestration tool cannot do what the reverse ETL can do, and definitely cannot do it well. And the opposite applies as well. So that's how I would like you to think about this. So I come back to this idea, right? Flexibility pillar number 1. Think about the usage of your data, and then think about the tools that go with it. And now you can call this dual zone or dual purpose. Actually, Deloitte has written an amazing article about this called Dual Zone Data Structure. I highly recommend you guys check it out. Gartner actually just put out a piece of research last Friday, I think, right, Matt? That actually talked exactly about the dual zone. And the whole world is going in this direction because it solves a lot of problems. Adobe says this, Snowflake says this, Action IQ says this. Everybody has this approach because it really does solve a lot of problems. You can call it activation and analysis layer if you want. You can call it fast and slow. Mike Anderson likes to call it RAM and hard drive. You can call it real time and batch. Call it whatever you want. The reality is they work together like PB&J, but individually they don't do what the other person does well, okay? So that's the point number 1. Now, to pressure test this, let's apply some use cases to it. And what better use cases than AI, because that's our world right now, right? So I picked 4 use cases that you've probably seen in the last 2 days that help you understand how to think of the flexibility in this layer. Because that's what matters, right? You find out today morning, you got to do something as fast as possible. How do you respond? That's what matters. So we come back to you're going to see this diagram a lot, but we come back to our data layer. And what I want to do, my first use case is in-session AI. Next best offer, product recommendation, propensity, prediction, whatever you want to call it. Somebody takes an action, I get a score, and then I activate that score. And you heard a lot about that from Drew just now and Jennifer, and I think everybody talked about that, right? So as thinking about that use case, I want to put these 2 ideas in your head. Sometimes your data layer is making the decision of what happens next. It acts like a traffic cop. And sometimes the decision comes from the channel, and it just needs to enrich that decision with a little bit of information from this data layer, okay? So you're not always activating in the same place. That's the first thing you got to understand is some things will happen in the channel and some things will happen in the data layer. And once you start thinking about it that way, you can understand how your data needs to work. So let's apply that idea and see if that makes sense to you guys. The dark blue are the primary tools in this case. They are the ones making the decision. The dark brown are the secondary tools. They're the ones that are consuming the information. And everything else is just part of the system. So imagine somebody takes an action on the website, and I want to know what's the next best offer to show this person. My AI, in this case, lives in the next best offer tool. My CDP, my real-time CDP, gets the action from the website and immediately pings the AI tool, gets back the next best offer. We do this with Pega with a lot of our customers. And then it knows what to do, and based on the score it gets back, then it activates exactly where it's supposed to go. And now I've got my in-session offer, whatever that looks like, my recommendation. In this case, the activation, the decision, happened in the CDP. The AI lived in a different tool in my next best offer tool, and the other two things were just partners of the decision, okay? So real-time, very quick. Now Pega is able to give us real-time response, but I had a long conversation with Hari from AWS yesterday, who was explaining to me how Pega has gotten there. They have been building their models and their infrastructure together, optimizing it for real-time response. So they have gotten there with a lot of effort and trial and error, but that's where we're headed. So now imagine that could be call center. That could be identity. That could be consent. That could be a lot of things that I have to go get. It doesn't have to be AI, but it's the integration benefit that you're getting by able to, the CDP can go get a piece of data and then activate accordingly, okay? Now immediately I can flip this. Oh, sorry, this one is a traffic cop. So the CDP is acting as the orchestrator. Now we'll talk about the second one. Very, very common use case happening right now. I'm implementing a chatbot, and it is working with some AI, and they both have the AI. They might not need to interact with my CDP at all. They might just be able to do this on their own. But now you're only activating what you heard in the prompt. If you want to enrich this, and this is what Drew and everybody was talking about, you hit the CDP, you get back a response immediately, and then you can make the chatbot response that much more personalized or relevant or targeted. This is a very common use case. Again, Invoca was talking about this, right? If Invoca wanted to show a relevant offer to the customer or give them an offer on the phone, they got to go get it from the CDP. Tell me a little bit more about the customer. You could be the loyalty system could be hitting you. The checkout system in the store could be hitting you. There could be any number of use cases that need to go get some score from the CDP. Tell me who this person is. Tell me what their relationship is with us. Is their account status in red? So here it's acting like a librarian. It's actually just giving that piece of information back to the channel so the channel can do the exact thing you needed to do. Now I'm just going to go faster for the other two. Same idea in the data lakehouse. This is very, very common use case. I want to run a model or a query, find people that I need to re-engage, people that I haven't connected in a long time, people that are very high value that I want to go find. I do that, I have an audience, and then I activate that audience in either ad tech or email or wherever channel. Now here, the reverse ETL would be amazing because that's exactly what it's for. And here, the traffic cop is not real time. It's thinking, it's calculating, it's assessing, and then it's taking action, right? It's not triggered by somebody else. It's triggered by the CDP itself or the data layer in the middle. And you can do the same thing the opposite way. The automation platform or the campaign platform, they might need to go get a whole list of users from the data warehouse to try to do something with it. So in that case, that AI recommends an action, and then they come to the warehouse and they figure out what's that list of people that they have to activate, and they go do it. Now, 4 different ways of using your data layer and 4 different connections, but all able to happen very quickly because your data strategy is represented in your data layer. Your business vision is represented in your data layer. So the tool is not having to adjust how it works. It just uses the data the way you give it, and it can do exactly what it wants, right? So no strategy session is complete without a 2x2, so I got to do a 2x2. So you have activation through the center on the top where the CDP is acting like a traffic cop, and you have activation in the channel at the bottom where the data layer is acting like a librarian. These are our 2 big ways of thinking about this, and on the sides is the speed. If you get all 4, you get full coverage of possible integrations that you might have to deal with. Not necessarily 100%, but close to 100%. So just let's look at what we looked at, right? In session activation, again, could be anything, doesn't have to be AI, but whether it's next best offer or some prediction, or audience models that you're doing, high performers or likely churn risk. Similarly, on the librarian side, you can do the AI and channel. Now, most people will say, we do some of these, we don't do all. We don't have to worry about real time, or we don't have to worry about in session. Well, the minute you have to worry about it, if you have to go build it, that's going to add a massive amount of work to your plate. But more important, it'll force you to build just for that use case. And you won't be able to expand quickly after that. That's the number one complaint we heard. One of our customers said they had their team build Google Cappy, took them 6 months, worked great. And they said, great, give us Meta. They said, oh, we need another 4 months. You don't have that kind of time anymore. That's not how this world works now. So you've got to think about all these from your data layer point of view, not from your tools point of view. And that gives you the option, okay? So let me tell you why this matters. This is my bank. I have all these ways of interacting with my bank. You can put an airline over there. Airline gives you all these options. You can put your health company there now. They give you all these options. They're not all connecting to the data the same way. And honestly, if a bank wasn't giving you all these, you probably wouldn't choose that bank. Even the check, which sometimes we have to write, it's just the way it is. They all use data differently and at different speeds. And that's what gives you full coverage. That's just where we are today. That's what the consumer expects. So you cannot do half of these and think you're covered. It's not going to happen, right? So I know you want to take that photo. I'll give you that later. So this is what I mean. Look at all these ways of sending data to the CDP. Now, most CDPs have not necessarily all, but a lot of these ways of sending data. They're all different. They all have a purpose. But the mistake that's happening is you're doing this just to the CDP, and you're leaving the data lakehouse or warehouse sitting as a complement. Whereas really, you got to have access to the data warehouse just as much, because your use cases get unlocked only when you have equal access to whichever tool you need. And it's not just on inbound, it's also on outbound. That's the real power of the system. Having a purpose-built architecture is only part of the solution. Having access to that architecture is the real power of that solution. And having all types of access now gives you the ability to respond to anything that comes. Because I promise you, next year, we're not talking about half the stuff we talked about this time. World is going to change a lot. And that's what we want to be able to respond to. So that's my flexibility pillar number 2 for you guys, is think about all the different ways of access that give you coverage and start planning all of them, because you're going to need them all. Now, DJ is sitting right here. I told DJ multiple times to come to this session because this is not the whole solution. This is reality check number 3. There is no data future without consent. It is that simple. Sharon said this yesterday. If you are not doing this stuff, start doing it now. And you know, there's so much I've heard talking to people over the years. It's changing, hasn't changed yet. That most people think of privacy still as a blocker. They think of their privacy teams as a blocker. And the mistake is you go to them after you finished your whole plan or your implementation and then say, can you review this? That's the worst way to do it. And I was thinking about what example could I give you guys that would give context to what this means, right? So I deal with health issues. That's been my lifelong challenge. And somebody said to me recently that really stuck with me, which I had not heard this sentence before, was make time for wellness now or time for illness later. This is not somebody trying to wake you up. This is just a fact of life. This is biology. And I actually offer you, if you guys saw Jeff on the dance floor yesterday, if you take care of your health, it actually becomes an advantage, right? So you got to think about privacy the same way. It is a fact of life. And instead of just treating it as a must-have or a legal disclaimer, embrace it. And only then will you actually start to lean into it. So I offer you, make time for compliance now, or you're going to make time for bigger headaches later. It's just a fact of life. And if you don't embrace it, you're going to have to embrace it later. So you might as well use it as a strategic advantage. You might as well use it as a way to differentiate yourself. Phil's Coffee, they will say, we will never sell your data. It says everywhere on the app when you sign up. And I've never gotten an ad from them ever. And guess what? They have the highest registration rate of mobile apps. because they tell you up front, we're not going to do anything. Now, they can get away with that right now, but they took a stand and they delivered on it, right? And it makes a difference. So what does this mean in the data layer flexibility story we're talking about? Coming back to our favorite diagram. Now in this case, let's look at the left side as inbound. So on the inbound is consent capture. Now the CMP showed up. I think we have like 400, 500 CMPs in the market, consent management platforms. They take care of the capture for client side. They enforce with tags. Most people, especially in this country, think that's it. And that's a big problem, because that only takes care of tags. It does not account for different devices and technologies. It does not account for server-side consent. That is a big part of consent. So you got to think of that purple arrow. I think it's purple. You got to think of the purple arrow. How do I transfer the consent I just collected into the rest of my system? That is critical, and that is the part that more and more companies haven't really figured out yet. So I highly recommend you start looking at that, okay? And then once you have the consent in your data layer, now you've got to do a lot of things with that consent. So I'm calling it centralized enforcement, but you can call it centralized consent management, however you want to think about it. You got to make sure your governance team has a place to configure the rules that they're going to ask you to follow. Our bank customers, they have more governance rules above compliance. You've got to think about how you're going to enforce the consent you just collected. You have to think about cross-device reconciliation. You know what's happening? People are calling call centers and saying, I don't want to get emails from you. How are you going to do that? Where is your call center going to take away consent from your activation channel? You got to think about that. You got to make sure that if your downstream tool needs the consent signal, you have a way to send it. They haven't all gotten there yet, but they will. They have to, right? Especially with AI. I got to tell them, hey, don't use this person's data in the AI, so I'm going to have to send the consent. And sensitive data handling is going to be just default. It should be default already. But if you have all this stuff here, then I don't have to worry about data that goes through the system. This system has taken care of my consent now. Any data that goes outside, I'm good. DJ is going to give me approval without me having to worry about it at all. So if you want to respond quickly, you connect something to this system, it's consented. It's ready to go. It has your data strategy. It has your audiences, right? And then you got to think about DSAR, and you got to think about auditability. And we highly recommend you always think about, privacy by design is a very big philosophy, but if you start thinking about it, basically it means don't take any chances. Whenever you don't know something, just block the data. That's the default. If you do that, you're in the safest, and then you can slowly figure out what's right for your business. So that's my pillar number 3 for you guys. Integrated and centralized consent. If you have this, your data layer is ready to go. So recap, right? Multiple purpose center of your data gravity, very, very strategic, where all your data vision is implemented. All the ways to access that data in both parts of that system, if it's 2, if it's 3, integrated centralized consent, and then think about your different user bases. Make sure you can track what data is going through. Auditability, very important. And then scalability and reliability, I feel I should not have to say it, but it's very, very important. So if you do this, you can start preparing for this. I promise you, this is never going to change. And we're going to have to keep dealing with it, right? Think about your current situation. Just because somebody else is doing something does not mean that solution will just work for you out of the box. You have to think about your current data. That is the biggest thing that people forget. And everybody expects this to be easy. Not easy, okay? If you embrace it, it'll be better. Think about covering all these bases. I'll give you an example. If you build a house, you want a 4-bedroom house. You're starting with a 2-bedroom house because that's the money you have. You know you're going to add 2 more bedrooms later. You're going to plan your plumbing and your electricity and your gas accordingly, so you can think about that. If you don't, you're going to have to make a lot of changes. So this is why the data layer should not be use case based. The data layer should be strategy based. And then your edge tools, they can be use case based, okay? That's how you got to think about it. Then you have flexibility, adaptability, future proofing. In fact, the ways of access, that's what gives you future proofing. And if you do that, then Hulk is not going to drive you crazy, right? This is genuinely how I've been feeling for the last few years about the new stuff I've had to figure out and explain. So I felt it was the best representation. So, thank you. And thank you to everybody who came, who made the effort to be here. You guys engaged so generously. You guys shared so much. Thank you for all our sponsors, everybody who came. You guys have made this event amazing. So I cannot say thank you enough. This is the last session of the day. We are now officially done. I think there's food outside. I'm not sure. Yes, there's food outside. Please go help yourselves. Find me and fight with me about whatever you want. Nathan has been fighting for 2 days already. But yeah, I know people think that I'm saying this because I work at Telium. The fact is, I work at Telium because Telium is organized like this. I found them and I came work here because I believe this is what the data layer should be. So yes, it feels self-serving, but it's also our true philosophy. So I hope it helps you guys. Thank you.